According to reported statistics, it is the gray alien who is most commonly associated with the phenomenon of alien contact or alien abductions. They are also the entity that is most prominently reported in close encounter claims that include the elements of telepathic communication or psychic visions. Actually, they're the most common entity involved with all close encounters in general. Now, before the Greys came along, aliens were generally imagined to be, benevolent intergalactic travelers from distant planets who were just simply passing through. But unfortunately, these new and supposed real-life gray aliens were much different. This wasn't the same narrative that was previously recycled through decades of science fiction. And it was clear that these aliens were more than just visitors from another planet. It would seem instead that they were operating according to a mysterious agenda in which human beings seemed to be the subject. And instead of landing peacefully on the White House lawn and saying, "Take me to your leader," or incinerating the White House with space lasers, they were seemingly more interested in the affairs, beliefs, behaviors, and personal lives of regular everyday people, and interacting intimately with targeted individuals, beaming telepathic messages to them and teleporting them to different worlds, or materializing through the walls of their bedrooms, and taking control of their minds and possessing their bodies. All the type of stuff that you or me would probably immediately recognize to be demonic activity. As the proliferation of the UFO cults and contactee hype of the 1950s cooled down, the trajectory of modern UFO activity would take a dark turn when those lamb-like gray aliens would rear their truly ugly heads once again. They were ready to turn things up a notch, and common reports of benevolent alien communications were being replaced by reports of malevolent alien abductions. This new trend in the alien contact phenomenon started around 1961 with the famous case of Barney and Betty Hill, a married couple who was driving through the hills of New Hampshire late one September night when Betty spotted a uniquely bright light in the sky. And as she watched it, she noticed that this light was moving and behaving strangely. And she finally convinced Barney to pull over so that they could view the light through a set of binoculars that they had with them. And upon doing this, it became apparent that this light was actually a craft of some sort with multicolored flashing lights. And becoming frightened by the strange sighting, they decided to keep driving, but the craft followed them. And as they continued traveling along the winding roadways, the strange light remained within their proximity at all times, before eventually dropping down at a rapid speed and stopping directly above their vehicle. Barney would then exit the car with his binoculars in one hand and his handgun in the other, testifying that through his binoculars he had witnessed a number of these creatures through the windows on the ship. And at this point, a fog of confusion then fell onto the couple, and the next thing they remembered, they were arriving back at their house, but many hours after they should have. And that's why this case has been used as a primary example of the missing time phenomenon that many self-proclaimed abductees claim to experience. But it would also become a foundational case in the history of alien abductions. Now, although Barney and Betty had no clear recollection of the events that transpired immediately following their close encounter with the mysterious UFO, they sensed that they had been victims of a strange assault. They also began to discover strange anomalies and bits of evidence related to the event. Both of their watches had stopped ticking and would never work again. And there was an odd pink-colored film of powder that covered the dress that Betty wore that night. There were also strange markings on the car, things like this. But it wouldn't be until days and even weeks later that their abduction experience at the hands of these gray aliens would begin to trickle back into their memories. It happened first through vivid dreams that Betty was having. Barney was not convinced until they both underwent hypnosis much later and recounted an identical story about being taken aboard a mothership, being invasively evaluated by these alien beings, and receiving telepathic messages. And in the decades to follow, many similar stories of alien abductions would begin to emerge.
Of course, we could see them in the opening coming from, when they started out the craft. But
did you think it was people coming out at first?
Well, they had. I kind of thought it was people at first, off like that. But of course, when they appeared there in front of me, it was the most shock I've ever had in my life.
I think it's interesting that such a large portion of these abduction claims are revealed through the use of hypnosis. I mean, just imagine how utterly terrifying, and shocking and amazing it would be if you were the subject of one of these alien abductions, or even just a close encounter for that matter. I mean, to actually witness it with your own eyes, and then you're going to turn around and tell me you don't remember a single detail from the event. I don't know. In fairness, I guess it makes sense to a degree, because it is possible as a result of experiencing a traumatic event, if the impact is overwhelming enough, for your brain to automatically block that memory from your mind. It's an instinct of self-preservation that's called mental dissociation, and in a way, it's sort of a merciful facet of God's creation that enables a victim to cope with the aftermath of extreme trauma. And, and I think it goes without saying that to experience something so terrifying and traumatic as an alien abduction should certainly be enough to trigger this effect of mental dissociation. However, mental dissociation is not the only reported cause to this effect of abductees forgetting their experience. In fact, while under hypnosis, some abductees have even claimed that their memories were deliberately erased by these alien captors. Something akin to that little memory wiping device that Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones used in the movie Men in Black. The first reported use of hypnotic regression as a technique to study alien abductions was actually in the case that we just discussed of Barney and Betty Hill, who underwent hypnosis in 1964, which was 2 years after their alleged alien abduction experience. And these sessions were conducted by Dr. Benjamin Simon, a psychiatrist who specialized in hypnosis. And this method of using hypnosis in therapy was considered really controversial at that time. Actually, it still is now. But even more so in the 1960s, and so this was kind of a one-off thing with Barney and Betty Hill. However, years later in the 1980s, the famous Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs would go on to popularize the use of regressive hypnosis in the investigation of alien abductions. And the goal of regressive hypnosis is to induce a trance-like state in the subject, which allows them to recall memories or experiences that may have been forgotten or repressed due to mental dissociation, like we just spoke on. And then by guiding the subject through these memories, the therapist can help them to relive and describe any experiences related to their alleged abduction. I mean, it seems stupid, and it is stupid, but if you trust in this method, I could see why you would come away believing in alien abductions, because it turns out that many people under hypnosis have made familiar claims of being abducted and subjected to similar objectifications. Actually, an unproportionately large number of people report this type of thing under hypnosis. But here's the thing about hypnosis. Well, for one, it's extremely easy to influence somebody that's under hypnosis. I mean, duh, right? That's the whole purpose of hypnosis in the first place. And plus, when the primary source of such reports are coming from people like Bud Hopkins or John E. Mack, who are practically ufologists that are directly affiliated with the research of alien abductions, well, then it's pretty easy to detect a conflict of interest here. But second, even under the most honest circumstances and in the most professional setting, hypnosis can never reveal any information beyond the perception of the subject. It's not an accurate representation of the actual event. It's merely a descriptive account of the way that said event was perceived by the subject. In other words, it's coming from the mind and soul of the person being hypnotized, which happens to be the very place where we would expect for oppressive demonic spirits to dwell in the situation that this was demonic, in fact. And based on what I read in the Bible, I actually believe that demonic oppression and possession is far more common than people realize today. And if the subject under hypnosis really was experiencing demonic activity, well, then even an unbiased secular psychologist would be at a loss to articulate or to define it properly. And there are many examples of this, but one instance that comes to my mind is the book Communion by Whitley Strieber. Strieber is a fictional horror writer who claims to have undergone numerous interactions with extraterrestrial beings. Yes, the gray lamb type. And much like Barney and Betty Hill, Strieber's experiences were also supposedly hidden in the recesses of his subconscious mind until he underwent hypnosis by the famous Bud Hopkins, which then unearthed vivid memories of his terrifying encounters with these beings. Now, I first read the book Communion when I was in my early 20s, and I got to admit that despite being entertained by the premise of the story, I really didn't believe Strieber's claims to be true. Because he was already an accomplished author who specialized in writing on similar topics before publishing his own alleged true story. And it just happens to be a pretty convenient encounter for somebody in that particular line of work, But sure enough, it became his first bestseller. And at the time that I read Communion, as well as a plethora of other UFO and alien-related books, I actually believed in the conventional perception of the UFO phenomenon. And that it represented the interstellar exploration of alien creatures from distant planets and the whole 9 yards, but I still considered Strieber's story to be untrue. However, I was struck by the spiritual language in which he described these experiences. The title itself, Communion, being a reference to a shared heritage with these beings. Like many other abductees, he suffered from sleep paralysis, and he claimed that they would control his body. And interestingly, he described the aliens to smell like sulfur, an odor that is commonly associated with demonic activity. And he also described the beings themselves, as well as the spacecraft, in religious terminology, and noted that some of them were reminiscent of the Sumerian goddess Ishtar, and he was poked and prodded and seduced and psychologically molested, and he came away from it all with a heightened sense of spiritual awareness. He described it like a spiritual awakening. And whether Strieber's story is true or not, his book is a good example of how hypnosis has been instrumental in the development of the common abduction narrative, and it just so happens to be another illustration of how the alien and UFO phenomenon is commonly associated with elements of spirituality. And so let's step back and consider all of this information in context with the biblical reality of demonic possession. I mean, isn't it strange that so many of these alleged close encounters result in some type of spiritual experience? I mean, it's honestly become like a cliche stereotype, where the abductee or experiencer begins an ongoing relationship with the alien entities and then becomes obsessed or perhaps possessed, And there tends to be a strong element of spirituality and intimacy there with the extraterrestrials. And then in a twist that's eerily reminiscent to the amazing events of Genesis chapter 6, with the Nephilim, many of these interactions with the gray aliens reportedly involve the harvesting of human sperm and eggs to create hybrid creatures. And this scenario has been described by a truly staggering number of abductees. And sometimes the abductee will even claim that they will have continuing visits or visions from the offending aliens to meet with their alien hybrid child, And I know it's crazy, but perhaps no less crazy than the pursuits of Jack Parsons and Cameron with their moon child, And remember what Lamb told Crowley, it's all in the egg.
And while it is still very difficult for us to believe that a spaceship landed and that robot-type creatures came out and actually took these two people into the spaceship, these men, in my opinion, believed that they saw this and that they were being honest in reporting what they have reported.
From a rational standpoint, you just can't explain this type of intimate or even spiritual human interaction from mere interstellar travelers who are pursuing their own ambitions, I mean, what real-life cause could motivate these aliens to abduct or possess or torment and manipulate the minds and bodies of human beings?
We number in the many thousands. We are projecting to you with all of our hearts the infinite love that stems from the most high dimensions.
Save up to 80% on your New Age books, records, CDs, audio, and videotapes with no obligation whatever by joining the New Age Media Club.
Read about the reality of extraterrestrial life and the future of Earth within an interplanetary confederation in a new book, Preparation for the Landing, by cosmic visionary Uriel, published by the Unarius Educational Foundation.
The New Age America Video Catalog lets you meet the leading spokespersons, companies, and products within the New Age industry. The New Age America Video Catalog is your key to the future, featuring New Age music, crystals, astrology, numerology, spirituality, books, UFOs, and much, much more.
Preparation for the Landing. Are you ready?
I fully acknowledge that I wouldn't know the first thing about what motivates the pursuits of an extraterrestrial, or of Lamb. But we do know from Scripture what motivates the pursuits of Satan and of his demons. We know that Satan wanders about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour, as written in 1 Peter 5. He blinds the minds of unbelievers, he exploits a lack of understanding, he imitates religious roles, he misuses Scripture, he attacks the faith of believers, and he indulges the delusions of unbelievers. And as we went over before, not only is he a liar, but he's described by Jesus as the father of lies. And he's also the God of this world, so perhaps those two things combined make sense when you take a look at this world around you. And so that's the demonic motivations of our enemy, to persecute the truth of God's word and those who believe and follow it, and then to lead everybody else into deception. But to complete my point, although society may have done away with the contactee movement and with the proliferation of these UFO cults that were emerging in the 1950s, it's pretty apparent that public interest in alien abductions began to grow rapidly in the early 1980s, alongside a dramatic increase of real-life abduction reports and many more reported cases of close encounters of the third kind. And I think that this increase was undoubtedly influenced by the sweeping cultural impact that movies and entertainment were having on society by this time. The 1980s brought a booming economy to Hollywood. It was a generation characterized by pop culture and social trends. And MTV was unleashed on society, subjecting the masses to this MK Ultra style mind control. And pop stars like Michael Jackson and Madonna were spending million-dollar budgets on music videos and stage performances, and really entertainment had never been more profitable. You know, film budgets were bigger, and special effects had entered a new tier of technical ability. It was a futuristic generation, replete with a wide array of new technologies, from personal computers and video game consoles to camcorders, VCRs, and cable television. You know, so never before was this fantasy world so immersive and so easily accessible. And so when I see these statistics that show a big spike of interest in alien close encounters and abductions, and then when I consider the fact that the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind came out in 1977, I'm not that surprised by it. You know, I think it's fair to assume that most people didn't even know what a close encounter of the third kind was before the movie came out. And there was also a burgeoning industry for conspiracy-based entertainment by this time. And thousands of books were published with titles like The Truth About Roswell and The Flying Saucers Are Real. And the belief that governments were engaged in conspiracies and cover-ups was steadily becoming more popular. For example, the story of Barney and Betty Hill had now become a national headline through the success of the book Interrupted Journey by John Fuller. And Americans were starting to develop a healthy but misguided distrust in government, you know, because a lot had changed since the inception of the UFO and contactee movement in the 1950s. New technologies had enabled an expansion in media and in media consumption, and although things like government corruption and conspiracy were nothing new, they had never before received this level of coverage. You know, and events like the assassination of JFK or the questions around the moon landing and the Watergate scandal had planted a seed of doubt in public trust. And from the 1980s onward, this proliferation of alien invasion movies has only grown. And the lamb-like grays would become today's stereotypical expression of an alien, you know. And the popular alien-themed science fiction at this time would also start to shift into darker themes, more commonly depicting these spiritual and psychological elements that I just spent the last 2 hours relating to demonic possession. You know, often with humans as the helpless victims and the prey of these aliens, as opposed to the heroes and conquerors that the more innocent old-timers imagined us as. And the old narrative of friendly space brothers inviting contactees to join them on guided space tours, you know, aboard their flying saucers, well, those stories disappeared, only to be replaced by a new narrative of these malevolent interdimensional aliens manifesting into the bedrooms of terrified humans to initiate a terrible sequence of torture and abuse. And this transition was accommodated by a new brand of contactee movement as well.
If I would title this tape, it would be Last Chance to Evacuate Planet Earth Before It is Recycled.
It's been 20 years since 39 members of the Heaven's Gate cult were found dead, their bodies discovered under purple shrouds inside a mansion in Rancho Santa Fe.
Ties to a cult may have led to a fatal shooting in Monroe County. A woman is now in custody for shooting her boyfriend in the head.
They're all believed to be members of the Solar Temple cult. It's the second time in 14 months that members of the cult have perished. 53 members died in apparent murder-suicides in Switzerland and Quebec in October of last year.
The members executed their plan by drinking a lethal vodka phenobarbital cocktail, then laying down to die, hoping to enter an alien spacecraft.
It's the largest suicide in United States history, and it has all the components of just being so bizarre.
Overseas now, the charred bodies of 16 people, including 3 children, were found today.
500 officers were involved in the manhunt. It began on Friday when cars were found in the forest belonging to cult members. The 16 burned bodies were discovered this morning a couple of kilometers from the parking lot.
Claiming she shot her boyfriend, 32-year-old Stephen Mineo, and he was dead. Rogers told police she and Mineo were members of a cult centered on aliens and raptures, headed by a woman named Sherry Schreiner.
A story that shocked the world, the story of the Solar Temple cult.
The 1994 deaths were thought to be timed astrologically.
Hello? Yes, I need to report an anonymous tip. Who do I talk to?
Okay. This is regarding what?
This is regarding a mass suicide, and I can give you the address.
Investigators say the cult was obsessed with death and considered it an illusion. Experts say cult leaders told their followers that fire would lead them to a new world on another planet.
21 women and 18 men had taken their own lives.
And let me say that our mission here at this time is about to come to a close.
Their bodies were found lying in a star formation with their feet in the middle. Authorities say brush and trees stacked up around the clearing were likely used to light the bodies on fire. The same star formation was used in October 1994. The bodies of 48 members of the Doomsday Cult were found in burned-down buildings in a small town in Switzerland. 5 more bodies were found in a burned house in Quebec.
The judge who led the inquiry says at least 30 were simply murdered in a well-planned, carefully arranged ritual. Members of the Solar Temple were bound by a death pact, but the Swiss believe this was more like mass assassination. The leader, Joseph de Mambro from Quebec, was described as an obsessed and dangerous paranoid. He was the one who ordered the transit, the voyage that would take followers to another planet.
They were all in identical positions, face up on a mattress, everyone wearing their black outfit, Nike shoes, and most covered with purple shrouds.
We might see you all again, and then we might not, but we hope that you remember us as we were, and not how other people are going to try and tell you that we are. And one last thing we'd like to say is 39 to beam up. Thank you.